Welcome back to class, my wonderful student. We shall proceed to Propositional Logic Part 1. The lesson outline include intelligent system, propositions, compound propositions, truth table, and biconditional proposition.
Intelligent system. An intelligent system is an advanced computer system that can gather, analyze, and respond to the data it collects from its surrounding environment. What do you understand by propositions? A proposition or statement is a verbal or written declarative sentence that is either true or false. A proposition or statement is a verbal or written declarative sentence that is considered to be either true or false. For example, 4 plus 5 is equal to 9 and 2 plus 3 is equal to 4 are both propositions or statements. The first statement is true and the second statement is false. Also, when a statement is true, it's represented by T, and when it is false, it's represented by F. Compound proposition. A proposition can be obtained from the combinations of two or more simple propositions by means of logical operators called connectives, or by neglecting a single proposition. Such a combination is called a compound proposition. A compound proposition is also a molecular or composite proposition. Connectives. Connectives are words or phrases or symbols that are used to form compound proposition. The basic connectives are negation, conjunction, disjunction, implications, and equivalence. Conjunctions. Conjunctions is also known as and conjunctions are true when both statements are true. Is denoted by the symbol represented there. If P and Q are both true, then P and Q are true. If P is true and Q is false, then it means that what? The statement is false. If P is false and T is true, then the statement is false. And if P is false and Q is also false, then it means that the statement is false. So this is conjunction. Disjunctions. Disjunctions means or. Disjunctions are true when either one or both statements are true. Either one or both statements are true. If you look at P and Q, the first row, P is true, Q is true, then it means the statement is true. P is true and Q is false, then it means the statement there is true. The third row, P is false and Q is true, then it means the statement there is true. The last row, P is false and Q is false, then the statement there is false. Negation. Given a statement P and Q, the negation of P and Q is written as the negation symbol P and the negation symbol Q. What this negation means is that if P is true, the negation of P will be false. If Q is also true, the negation of Q will also be false. And that is what we have in the table there. P is the first column. P is true, true, false, false, and Q is true, false, true, false. Negation of P is false, false, true, true, and negation of Q is false, true, false, true. That is negation. Conditional proposition. Given that P and Q are propositions, the compound proposition, if P then Q, which is symbolized by P implies Q, is called a conditional proposition or an implication. I repeat again. Given that P and Q are propositions, the compound proposition if P then Q, which is symbolized by P implies Q, is called a conditional proposition or an implication. In this statement, that is the proposition, P is considered the antecedent or hypothesis, while Q is called the consequent or the conclusion. Here is the truth table for conditional proposition. The only condition that makes a conditional statement to be false is when the antecedent is true and when the consequent is false. That is, when the hypothesis is true and the conclusion is false, and you obtain that truth table. Converse proposition is the reverse of the conditional statement. Conditional statement is if P then Q. Then the reverse of that statement is if Q then P. Inverse proposition. Inverse proposition is the negation of a conditional proposition or statement. If negation of P, then negation of Q. The conditional statement there is if P then Q, and the negation of that statement is if negation P then negation Q. As simple as that. Contrapositive proposition. Contrapositive proposition is the reverse negation of the conditional proposition. Conditional proposition is always the reference point, and the reverse negation of this proposition is known as contrapositive proposition. Biconditional proposition. A biconditional proposition is when the conditional proposition and converse have the same true or false value. It is represented by P implies Q and Q implies P. This means that these statements are reversible. P implies Q and Q implies P. Consider the proposition. P, you live in Abuja, and Q, you live in Nigeria. The conditional proposition states that P implies Q. If you live in Abuja, then You live in Nigeria. Is this statement true? Yes, it is true. In this case, the hypothesis is live in Abuja and the conclusion is live in Nigeria. So this statement is considered to be true. Converse proposition. Converse proposition is the reverse of conditional proposition. Conditional proposition state that if P then Q. So the reverse of that proposition is if Q then P. That means that if you live in Nigeria, then you live in Abuja. Is this statement true? It is not true. It is not true because Abuja is not the only place you can stay or you can live within Nigeria. So you can choose to live in Benin City, and that means that what? You are still living in Nigeria. So this is what makes the statement to be false. Inverse proposition. Inverse proposition is the negation of conditional proposition or statement. Inverse proposition of this is if you don't live in Abuja, then you don't live in Nigeria. Is this statement true? This statement is not true because if you don't live in Abuja, you can decide to live somewhere else, and that's somewhere else like Port Harcourt, and it still means that you are still living in Nigeria. So this is what makes the statement to be false. Contrapositive proposition or statement. Contrapositive proposition is the reverse negation of a conditional proposition. The reverse negation of a conditional proposition is if negation Q, then negation P. If you don't live in Nigeria, then you don't live in Abuja. Is that statement true? Yes, it is true, because as long as you don't live in Nigeria, which is a country, there is no how you can live within Abuja. So the statement is true. Now, is the statement biconditional? It is not, because the conditional statement is false and the converse is true. Biconditional proposition. So this is the truth table for biconditional proposition. Biconditional proposition means that the antecedent and the consequent are reversed. We have if P then Q and if Q then P. Don't forget that under conditional proposition, the proposition is only false if the antecedent is true and the consequent is false. So if we apply that to this statement, biconditional means you are having two conditional statements and both statements are reversible. So it means that as long as either of them is true, then the statement is considered to be false. Either the antecedent or the consequent. So this is what makes it to be false. Thank you for listening.